Typically, when responding to someone's argument we disagree with, our natural instinct is to give our reasons for disagreeing. I mean, what else are you supposed to do? Well, what if there was an easier, more effective way to respond? In typical video essay fashion, I'm going to give a long-winded analogy in order to make a point that could have been made in half the time. So imagine one day, your neighbor knocks on your door at 2 a.m. and they say, "Hey, I know that you stole my pink lawn flamingo because it's a well-known fact that you collect pink things that stand on one leg." There are two general ways that you can respond to this accusation from your neighbor. One way would be to give a reason for them to believe that their conclusion is false. And that might look something like this. "Look, dude, I couldn't have been the one to have stolen your flamingo because despite my weirdly specific interest in pink birds, I was here all night at my soap duck carving contest with 74 of my closest friends, all of whom could testify to my whereabouts at the time of the theft." Let's call this approach giving a counter-argument, and this is typically what most people will do when faced with something they disagree with, but it's not always the most effective way to respond. Let's say you don't have an alibi because you didn't host your annual soup duck whatever. You might respond with something like this. "Look, dude, just because I like tacky lawn ornaments, it doesn't necessarily follow from that I was the one to steal your flamingo. I mean, really, does no one else like flamingos? And look, what evidence do you even have to prove this anyway? Is there anything physical or tangible or any actual legitimate reason to believe that I was the one to steal your flamingo?" The difference between these is that in the first response, you were giving them a reason to believe that you did not steal the flamingo. In the second response, you were simply showing that they had insufficient evidence or bad reasons for believing that you stole the flamingo. This latter sort of response is sometimes referred to as an undercutting defeater. It's basically where instead of giving what's called like a rebuttal or like a counter argument, you instead show that your opponent has insufficient evidence for coming to the conclusion that they're coming to. But instead of using technical jargon that you're probably not going to remember anyway, we're instead going to call it sweeping the leg, because that just sounds way cooler. And we're also going to define it a bit broader than like what you might find in a textbook if you were looking at undercutting defeaters in your philosophy class or whatever. So sweeping the leg then is whenever instead of giving a counter argument and saying that their conclusion is false, what you instead do is simply show that they have given insufficient evidence or bad reasons or even just making a baseless assertion and therefore can't come to their conclusion even if there is no counter argument or counter evidence. So a counter argument shows that a conclusion is false, and sweeping the leg shows that they don't have good enough reasons for coming to that conclusion, but it still may or may not be true, just like how you very well could have stolen the flamingo, but you just didn't leave behind enough evidence for anyone to prove it. So counter-arguments are good because they're more conclusive, but sweeping the leg is good at getting people to question why they believe what they do. And this is pretty useful because a lot of people never really bother questioning that sort of thing. And oftentimes people will just hear other people saying things and then they'll repeat it without having actually done the research to back it up. And I mean, really, we all do this to some extent. Typically, whenever challenged on an issue, our natural instinct is to go for that counter argument and say, no, your belief is wrong for this reason and that reason. But it's often much easier to go for this sweeping the leg sort of thing, because it's a lot easier to just show that a person's reasons are insufficient or totally lacking, or that they're just making a totally baseless assertion. It's easier to do that sort of thing than to actually formulate an argument for the opposite position. This idea goes hand in hand with something called the Socratic method. Now, there's already so much information in the YouTuber podcaster sphere about this, especially if you're watching a video like this and you've probably already heard a lot about this, so I will keep it brief. But basically, the Socratic method is where you're asking questions rather than making statements. And so instead of saying, well, hey, why do you think that I stole the... Oh my Y'all, I really just want to get through this video and eat dinner. So, instead of saying, hey, you're wrong because of this reason or that reason, the Socratic method is more like asking, why do you believe that? What evidence do you have to support it? And that sort of thing. Okay. So you can see how this pairs well with sweeping the leg, because in both cases, you're getting your opponent to call their position into question rather than having to defend your own position. And so this way, you're not the one that's on the hot seat. Alright, so this was definitely a shorter video than usual, but according to my analytics, you're probably not going to make it past the 3-minute mark anyway, so... In the next video, I show more practically how sweeping the leg can be used when I don't answer the question, is the book of Genesis incompatible with science? Man, I really hope people get that title. That's right, y'all, we're about to get into the science contradicts Bible debate, or Bible contradicts science debate. It's about to get real spicy. Okay, so this thing is really cool. You see how the screen is like vertical, like in portrait, and the game is horizontal, so you have these ugly black bars. Well, what if you could... Is that... I just have a problem with online shopping.